Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Passionate Talk. I am your host, Carey, and this is episode number 30, the first episode of 2018. Now, before I tell you about today's conversation, I want to take a moment to wish you all a Happy New Year and to thank you for a wonderful 2017. It's because of you folks that Passionate Talk is as successful as it is. I've had a blast with this podcast, and I truly appreciate and am grateful for all the support that you have given me. Subscribing to the podcast, sharing the podcast, everything that you've done to help this podcast grow from a little itty-bitty podcast to the monster it is becoming is just, it's beyond words for me. I just want to thank you for allowing me to share my stories, other people's stories, and inspire and empower as many people as I can, because that's truly the reason behind this podcast. Now, today's episode is with professional wrestler Adam Carey. Adam has been a professional wrestler on the independent wrestling circuit since he was 16, and he's going to share with us how he got into wrestling, how he started, how he met and worked with one of the legends of the business, Dusty Rhodes. He's going to talk about the many injuries that he has suffered because of the wrestling industry and how those injuries led him down a dark path to drugs, alcohol, and his battle with addiction of those drugs and alcohol. He's also going to share with us what his rock bottom moment was and how he climbed out of that pit of despair and pit of addiction to be the successful, loving husband he is today. So right now I want you to sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, maybe some tea, and get ready to listen to my conversation with Adam. How was your day?
Oh, we went out shopping. We went and did some pre-Christmas Christmas shopping. You know, that time where you're right between your paychecks, so you buy little things here and there, mainly for yourself, not really anybody else, because I'm selfish.
Well, of course you are.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I see stuff I want, and I take notes of the things I want. So when I get paid to go do Christmas shopping, I'll go buy the stuff I want instead.
So what was on the Christmas list for you in these in-between paychecks shopping spree?
Mainly my figures and my pops and stuff like that, man. I haven't sent you pictures of my collection, but I probably got over 500 of these things all around my office, and we go searching for specific ones and things like that, mainly legend stuff, older wrestlers, and you know, I've been buying stuff for my video games and all that too, so I'm just basically a geek. That's how it is.
Well, and that's a good thing, because a lot of my listeners really don't know what these legends and these pops are, and they don't know who you are. And you actually were on the professional wrestling circuit, the independent professional wrestling circuit, for, I'd say, most of your life. Since you were 17, you were a professional wrestler.
Yeah. Whenever I was younger, like anybody, their mom and dad brings you to a wrestling show, and you know, you always watch wrestling, and in the back of your mind, you're thinking, well, that's fake, that's fake, that's fake. And then there was that one match, or that one spot that says, well, that was fake, but that was real. That was real. So when I got started, I found somebody outside of a show, and it's kind of like the mafia, you know, you shake their hand special way and you say, hey, I get me into this. And the guy said, well, I got somebody who can get you in. He says, you just got to call him, and you got to make sure you call him early in the morning, because if you don't call him by 7 o'clock, then he doesn't answer his phone all day because he works. And this is before cell phones. So he gave me the number. And of course, here I am, 5:30 in the morning. I called this guy, and I kept calling until he picked up. Fifth time he picked up, I hear a voice that goes, hello? And I'm like, yeah, blah, 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 I want to wrestle. And he says, who in the bleep are you? It was Dusty Rhodes' phone number he gave me, which is a legend in the business.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, right. I was just going to go there because, I mean, you're on the show because, you know, we have a past history. We did The Hype Is Here for many years, which was a very successful pop culture comedy show. And we actually became friends through the wrestling circuit.
Yeah.
and you are very, very passionate about wrestling. Now, in the past, I've had people on this show who are passionate about Reiki and passionate about tarot and passionate about healing people. You were passionate about breaking people's bones inside the square circle, but it's passion nonetheless. And you were lucky enough to be trained by Dusty Rhodes. So, for our listeners who don't know, could you tell us who Dusty Rhodes is?
Dusty Rhodes is a veteran of the wrestling business, very charismatic. He wrestled for about 30 years. Dusty Rhodes was very popular in the North Carolina territories and things like that. A territory is an area where wrestling really thrives. So Dusty worked for all the main wrestling groups: WWE, WWF, WCW, NWA. Dusty Rhodes was one of the main three guys that made wrestling what it is today, between Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair.
Very cool. And this guy just that you met like in the back alley behind the stadium or the auditorium, who gave you this number, he just gave you Dusty's number and said, this guy will train you?
Yeah. So the guy his name was Hack Myers, and we could probably call back because Hack Myers used to show up to shows me and you were booked on for CWA and asked to work.
Wow. Okay. And this guy, Hack Myers, number one, guy's name Hack Myers, gives you a 15 or a 16-year-old kid a phone number and says, this guy will wrestle you. At this point, I'm assuming you don't know who Hack is from a hole in the head. And you actually called it.
Yeah, I saw him on a broadcast locally. I'd seen him here or there. I didn't know a lot about him. I knew he had worked in a group called ECW, which was a very violent form of wrestling. But I didn't know a lot about him. But it was supposed to be, you see, Hack was supposedly giving me this number because he was ribbing Dusty. He thought by giving some random person his number and having me call him that early in the morning, just wanted to do it to tick him off and rib him, because ribbing is wrestling if you know the business. So I wasn't never supposed to call that number. I was never supposed to show up and get trained. It was all one big rib.
Well, you know, it's funny because you tell that story, and folks, Adam and I spent many, many years together on the independent wrestling circuit, doing shows in Florida, in Mississippi, in Alabama, in Georgia, in Texas. And there is definitely a vocabulary to the wrestling world that is unlike anything that you will hear in English. And we're going to be using a lot of those terms, and we'll try to describe what those terms are while we're moving along so you don't get lost. Ribbing is basically a practical joke, if you want to think about it that way. And what I find really interesting is that the way the world works, you were so intent on being a wrestler. That's what you wanted. That's what you set your intention to, that Hack was just joking. He was ribbing Dusty by sending him this poor little, if you pardon the term, schmuck when he was 15 that was this skinny ass little scrawny kid. And it turned into the single moment that made you the main man.
Yeah.
That's what led you down. So it just goes to show you, we're talking about wrestling, which is not a usual topic for this show, but the principles hold true. State your intention, do anything you can to get there, and you will get there, because you have wrestled from that story. You have wrestled in front of thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah, and it was during a different time back in the day because the internet had just became a thing. We're talking 98, 99. It was a whole different environment. In fact, you didn't have a cell phone to get you out of certain predicaments. You were lucky if you had a pager. So when I was learning, I essentially had to show up and just put together rings and do all the dirty things that guys want to do to get into something you love, that you want to be around. Sometimes you have to do the dirty jobs just to get a foot in. You have to pay a little bit more money here or there and sacrifice a little more. But yeah, absolutely. And it was worth every step of it.
Yeah, you had to pay your dues. And that's really another great lesson, because I find that so many people nowadays, they don't want to pay their dues. They want the corner office. They want to be the entrepreneur online and make $100,000 in a week, but they don't want to learn the craft, whether that craft is wrestling, whether that craft is online marketing, whether that craft is podcasting. I mean, a lot of people have listened to my show and have told me, wow, I am really good at interviewing. I have a really great voice for radio, as opposed to a face for radio, which I also have, by the way. And the reason that is I've been doing this for years. this isn't my first rodeo. I have studied the radio game, the podcasting game. I have had mentors from some of the best people in the business, and it's made me who I am today. So, in paying your dues and training with Rusty with Dusty. Okay, there we go. First one of the show, folks. Can you tell us one of your best moments while you were training with Dusty? What was one of your favorite moments?
Oh goodness. And a lot of those moments were just getting out and being able to travel. You got to realize at 16 years old, when kids are just getting their license and doing things, I was able to travel the country and see things. And whether I was in a battle royal, which is where all 20 men get in the ring and just battle to throw each other out, I never was a guy that got put out there to head a card whenever I started. So it was just all about the experience. Dusty, a story about Dusty Rhodes. I wasn't there for this one, but I'll share this story with your listeners. Dusty Rhodes was the kind of guy that just honestly had the charisma of just every man you've ever met that you wanted to be like. And Dusty Rhodes was scheduled to do a commercial at one point. And I believe at the time it was a commercial with Chuck Norris or something like that. I can't remember the gentleman. And he was on scene. Well, they kept sending somebody to get Dusty out of his trailer, and they would knock and nobody would answer. And, so they kept going back and saying, well, Dusty's not responding. Dusty had went back to his trailer and went to sleep, even though he knew he had to get up and do a commercial. Well, finally they sent somebody in there who was pretty close to Dusty. They walk in and Dusty's in bed. He wakes up and he says, what's he doing here, brother? I'm sleeping. And Dusty had that lisp about him, so you knew his voice. And they're like, Dusty, you're ready. They need you out there. So Dusty gets up and he's naked from the waist down. For some reason, he's wearing a button shirt, collar, but no pants or underwear under. And the guy who goes and gets him, he says, Dusty says, aren't you, aren't you going to be wearing pants? Don't you wear underwear? And Dusty looks at him without cracking a smile. He says, baby, he says, when you are gifted like the American dream, you want to make sure that everybody gets a peek at the gander. And to this day, I don't know what that means, but a peek at the gander. As he's zipping up, he walks out there, films it in one take, and leaves, just like a cowboy, man. Dusty Rhodes is a true idol. So being around him was my experience,
Okay, so your best moment was just being around Dusty, someone that you had looked up to, that you had watched on Saturday mornings and Saturday evenings wrestling, and here one of your idols was training you.
Yeah.
So that's one of your best moments while you were training or in the wrestling world. What was one of your worst?
Well, just like anything, the wrestling business is everybody, the first thing out of people's mouths is wrestling's fake. Well, wrestling is a very physical form of entertainment. It's an art, and the art is to not kill yourself. Well, unfortunately, the wrestling business has done a lot of damage on me. And I'd say some of my worst moments were the times where I was trying to get through and trying to push through and trying to make it to a show and trying to get out there and do what I love to do. But instead of listening to my body and saying, hey, you broke your back, or hey, you separated your shoulder, I turned to some very dark places to try to get through. And quite honestly, it's the reason why today I'll still work wrestling shows, but I'm not in the ring anymore.
And folks, Adam made a reference to breaking his back. I was actually working that show with him. And I remember the moment he did break his back. It was a spot in the match, and a spot is basically a moment in the match. It's a big moment, a turning point moment in the match, where a wrestler gets thrown out of the ring and gets thrown into the arms of three other people who are outside the ring, who then fall down. And the audience, of course, doesn't see the three wrestlers on the floor catch him, so it looks like he's just being thrown into the chest. Adam, I think and please correct me, you caught it correctly, but there was a size disadvantage between you and the other two people that were there, so you landed incorrectly, and you landed on a hard concrete floor and broke the vertebrae in your back.
Yeah. So the gentleman who was on the top rope did a flip to the outside, which is it's a risky move. It's literally a stunt, and he kind of overshot me. There was a height difference between the other two guys around me. I'm 6'3.5". They were about 5'7" to 5'9", so he kind of overshot me. I went to catch him, and when I did, I went straight down. My lower back just kind of drove itself into the concrete, and I didn't know anything was wrong until, and it just goes to show you the mind and the body are just amazing things. I didn't realize anything was wrong until I got to the back and sat down, and I was talking to you or talking to somebody at the time, and just very casually taking my boots off, unlaced them, and I went to stand up, and that's when I knew something was terribly wrong.
I had no idea he broke his back until it came time for us to leave that night, and he asked me to drive his car home. But that's a different story for a different show. I think that's the first and the last time you'll ever ask me to drive your car, though.
Oh man, was it ever? The only thing I can remember from that night is, and again, this goes to having good people in your life and good friends. Gary was nice enough to carry me home, and I'll never forget. I'll never forget being carried into. Actually, I remember what it was. I asked you to back my car around to get me over there, and so you.
And I backed it right into a ditch.
So what a good friend does is he immediately backs your car into a ditch. So now we're stuck, and now my back's broke, and you somehow recovered from that because the power of Jesus would have compelled me to go out there and find you if you hadn't. But I remember driving you there. I remember driving you home, and I dropped you off. You were very concerned, which again I didn't know concern. Concern wasn't something that was shown for me many times during my childhood, growing up after, well, I'd say about 16. My family was always very concerned, but nobody else around me. I just remember that night you showing a lot of concern, and I remember that night I got home. At the time my wife walks outside and watches me literally crawl into the house. I couldn't even get in my bed. I laid on the couch. She got up and went to work, and I still knew something was wrong, but I didn't listen to my body. So I wound up calling my mom. She came and picked me up, and they took me to one of these little corner clinics that are made for the flu, not a broke back. And we did some X-rays. He actually sent me to a hospital to have X-rays, and they told me, he said, "Look, you've actually cracked one of your vertebrae." And I just shrugged it off because hey, that's what you do, right?
Now, all these years in the wrestling world, all the injuries, the injury to your neck, which we did not talk about, the injuries to your back, the sprained and separated shoulders, and everything else that goes, even from the minor bumps and bruises that you get, really, it took you down to a dark path. And during your time in those 20 years that you were on the road wrestling professionally, you started to drink heavily and you started to do drugs. Could you tell us how that started and how you got into the drinking and the
Well,
drugging?
it's kind of ironic how things happen because they happen right before your eyes. And you don't realize the pivotal points in your life and the decisions you make that can really change you for the better or for the worse. And I came home. I probably had a concussion. I know it was a terrible headache for 2 days. And my grandfather, who had been in an accident himself, he says, "Well, here, take one of these." And at the time, I didn't know what it was. I had no idea. Nobody had ever offered me anything, and it was a Percocet. And I took one, and I just remember it going away. So one turns to two, two turns to three. Before you know it, you don't feel anything, so you're okay in your mind. And obviously, when you don't feel anything, it's physically, but it's also emotionally. So next thing you know, you're drinking to try to find closure to injuries and to just anxiety, and it compounded itself. I'd say within 6 months, I was at a hole I couldn't dig out of. It was brutal.
And you stayed in that hole for quite a long time. I mean, truthfully and honestly, when I first met you, and you and I both met at when we both worked for a major telecom company, and you were doing the drugs and the alcohol when I had met you, and I was so stupid and naive at that point. I didn't pick up on any of it until I saw it in front of my face. And all the bad things that happened to you because of the drugs. You lost a lot because of your time on the drugs and the alcohol. You lost your wife. You lost your first wife. You're now married to a beautiful, beautiful woman who I am beating the tar out of in Words with Friends,
No.
incidentally. Yes, I am just destroying Jess at this moment. But in any case, your first wife, you lost that. You lost several jobs. You actually lost your house. You were homeless or living in your car for a while. You went to very, very dark places where you thought about doing damage to yourself and taking your own life. So, I mean, we're joking about it now because that's just the kind of relationship that Adam and I have, but it was really some serious dark stuff that you went through. So, what was the rock bottom moment for you? What was the moment where you said, "No, I'm worth more than this. I've got to get myself clean"?
During that time frame, I gained 120 pounds. I was pushing 300 pounds at the time. I think there was a few moments, and you hit moments, and you look back at them and you say, "Man, that was it." Honestly, I remember whenever me and my first wife were together, and I remember she would come to me and she'd say, "Adam, we only have $20 to last us a week." It's because every night I was buying a 6 pack of alcohol or something, and whenever that ended, of course, you automatically blame the other. But I knew it was my fault in the end, and I remember that was kind of it, man. I mean, after that went down, you go through your morning, and left the telecom company we were working at, and I basically just walked out because that was it. Um, but I had to spend a lot of time alone after that, and I had to reflect, and I just found a drive that has drove me to different places in my life at that time, and I wound up, like I said, after I lost my wife, I wound up losing, I'd say, about 110 pounds in a 7 month period. So
Wow.
I think that was, yeah, that's whenever it really started picking up. Now, I don't know how many people know this, but I'll say this much: when I did all that, I wound up relapsing. So when you hit that moment where you feel like that you're over the hump, it's a good it's a good mindset to keep, that never feel too comfortable with your surroundings, because you never know what's going to bite you next.
Amen. Now, you said that during that time you had to spend a lot of time with yourself and reflect, and you found strength. Did that strength come from a spiritual presence, a belief in God? Did it come from a belief in yourself? Did it come from something you read? How did you get that belief? Where did that reflection take you?
I think the most driven folks in life, you can praise God, and you can, whoever you turn to for your I guess your spirituality, or your effort. But in the end, you have to look within yourself. And I don't know what happened, but I always go to a very alone spot when something bad happens to me, and I looked within myself. It was a day where I'll never forget it. I woke up that day, and I just happened to have a picture at my parents. I went to see my parents, and there was a picture there of me whenever I was about 16, 17 years old. And I remember looking at that picture, and I'm like, that guy still exists. There's something there. And then when you start losing weight, as you know, and when you start doing the things that you need to do to get back on top, it motivates the strong folks to keep going. It takes the weakest people and makes them into monsters. And I think that's really all it was. You just got to get over that hump, find something you want, and go out and get it.
If anyone is in that dark place and they are struggling with drugs or alcohol or just with depression, and I say just with depression, and I don't mean to negate or minimize it because I suffer from depression myself and there's nothing just about it. What advice would you give to them to pull themselves out of that hole?
Well, always be honest with yourself. You always have to be honest with where you stand in life. You cannot, because when you walk around with your head in the clouds, you're not seeing what's below you. You always have to remember that every person you come in contact to, whether it be at work, whether it be in life, you see the same people on the way up as you see on the way down. And for many, many years, I treated a lot of people basically like they were just below me. And when you fall down and you need some of those people, that's when it really hits you that, hey, this whole life thing is, it's about this daily struggle and how you handle it. So if you're ever in that place, number one, it's hard to talk about those type of things, but never, ever, ever, ever bottle it up, because the more you bottle things up, the worse it's going to get. You have to find something within you, something worth living for. The day you give up, the day you quit living for something, is the day that you truly have lost all hope.
Well, I, for one, am glad that you didn't give up, and I always knew you to be a fighter. You just changed the person you were fighting. Instead of fighting yourself and your own demons, you started to fight for yourself against those demons. And to me, that is the greatest turnaround that happened. And when that started to happen, things started to fall in place for you. You got a wonderful job. You started your own company for a while, and you're still very, very involved in fitness and fitness training. Folks, you've heard me on this podcast talk a number of times about the weight that I lost, and Adam was instrumental in getting me there. He was one of my mentors. He was one of my guides that when I started to go on my weight loss journey, my health and fitness journey in January, I turned to develop a diet plan and develop a weight loss plan. But even before that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Adam looked at me and he went, dude, you're fat. Okay, because he doesn't have a great bedside manner. And he didn't give me a choice. He literally came to my apartment every day, forced me into the car, and we went to the gym, and he worked out with me every single day and made sure that I stayed on top of everything so I would lose the weight that I lost originally and then gain back many years later when I moved to New York. So how do you help people? Or let me ask you a different question. How did you get so knowledgeable on health and fitness and diet and nutrition, and why was that important to you? Was that an outgrowth when you came out of the drug abuse and the alcohol, that you said, look, I want to help people be healthy so they can live the lives they choose?
I think it was. When I was a teenager, I was big into that, but I used it for myself. I didn't use it to help other people. I used it to feed my own ego, essentially. So whenever I got back on top of things, I saw a lot of people out there that needed help. I obviously, with anything we do it for two reasons, whether it be financial or whether it be a personal accomplishment, an achievement of making yourself feel good. So there was a lot of people out there that I felt like that had the motion, but didn't have the fare to get there. It's like watching a bus that you need to catch go by, but you don't have the money to get on it. And I would take people and essentially help them try to find something fitness wise that worked for them, because as you know, not everything works for everybody when it comes to fitness.
Absolutely correct. And I love that metaphor. It's like watching a bus you need to catch go by you when you don't have the money to get on. That's a great metaphor. And I think it's very true for all of us, because we all have that challenge that we see our goal right in front of us, but we don't know how to get there. And everyone needs a mentor. Everyone needs a coach. And Adam was able to turn his life around and really make the focus of his life helping other people. He took everything that he went through and he said, okay, I came out the other side. Now let me make sure that other people don't go through what I did go through. And I just want to let people know right now, because I know you we've known each other for about 7, 8 years, almost 10 years now.
Yeah, I'd say over 10 years at this point, actually.
And you put up a great front in front of people. You're cocky, you're arrogant, you play it off like nothing really matters to you. But you're really one of the most spiritual and deep-minded people and thoughtful people that I have ever met. So if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us a little bit about your personal beliefs and philosophies in life? Not only what drove you to overcome the drugs and the alcohol, but just your general life purposes and why you believe we're meant to be here, what our purpose is, that kind of stuff. It was great catching up with Adam, and the one thing that I can say about him is he's a wonderful storyteller. The story that he told about meeting Dusty Rhodes and how he really never was supposed to be trained by Dusty, that it was all just one giant practical joke to get under the skin of Dusty. But Adam's passion and intention and desire to become part of the wrestling community and be a professional wrestler would not be denied, and he ended up being trained by one of the legends in the business. He also shared the story of how he paid his dues by breaking down the rings and doing all the dirty work that he had to do at the beginning to prove that he really was in this for the long haul. And that's a wonderful lesson that I think we all should take, that we all need to pay our dues and learn our crafts before we could reach the top. The story Adam told about how he saw the picture of his parents, and that gave him the strength to really climb out of the pit of despair and pit of addiction and to find himself again and to do something great with his life was absolutely inspiring. And I love the words that he gave us. Always be honest. Always be honest with yourself. There are 3 people you never lie to in life, folks. They are your doctor, your lawyer, and yourself. And that was some wonderful advice that Adam gave. Now, Adam's going to be back with us on Wednesday, and he'll answer the question I asked him right as this episode ended and tell us a little bit about his beliefs. He'll also share some more wrestling stories and more stories about how him and me got together and the fun we had on the road. He's also going to share one of his worst moments, one of the most dangerous situations that he found himself in. And believe me, folks, this story is so good, it could be a Lifetime movie of the week, so you don't want to miss it. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Passionate Talk. So until Wednesday, follow your dreams and passions and manifest the life that you choose.